Welcome to SDHC's Health and Wellbeing podcast. Before we begin, we want to emphasise that the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date content, it is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. Always seek the guidance of your doctor or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Remember, your health and well-being are invaluable, so prioritise consulting with a medical professional for your personalised care. Hi everybody, you're listening to the Health and Wellbeing podcast from South Downs Health and Care with your host Dr Nick Harvey. The purpose of this show is to help people understand how they can help themselves and others with their health and wellbeing. Every episode I interview an expert to understand the latest evidence and advice on how to improve your own health or help others. This month I welcome Katie Day to discuss menopause. Welcome.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. So Katie's one of the leading voices on menopause in the UK and has many UK and global private public health and education sector clients where she delivers RDPI's suite of programmes under the banner of Midlife Matters. She's an associate of the British Menopause Society, a member of EMAS, that's the European Menopause and Andropause Society, a member of IMS, the International Menopause Society, and works in close collaboration with leading clinical partners to professors of gynecology. She's appeared on TV and radio in the UK, India, Canada, US, Australia, and the Middle East, with the most recent being BBC Radio Sussex. In April 2022 and October 2023, she organised and delivered menopause conferences in UK Parliament with a panel of national speakers including 2 MPs and 1 minister. She's recently completed her master's degree, which she started age 60, and a research project was based around the menopause. She hopes to continue research via a PhD and be Dr. Day by the time she's 70. Really living her message there and showing it's never too late to do anything in life if the passion's there. She's written 2 books on women's personal development and appears regularly as a keynote speaker at global conferences. She gave a TEDx talk in 2019, The Roar of the Menopause, the roar of power and potency and how to embrace your second spring. Katie has lived in St Leonard's, locally to us, for 24 years and never tires of the view of the South Downs. So welcome, Katie. I'm exhausted, as always, reading that. And as I said before, always feel almost inadequate at how much you've achieved. So, yeah, good. The first thing that springs to mind when I read these bios is, what about you and life outside of work? And how do you manage that with everything else going on? So you tell me a bit about that.
That's a really interesting question, actually. And what I realise more and more as I get older is having a meaning and purpose in life is really, really important. So what gets you out of bed in the morning? What drives you? What brings you joy and gets you excited? And actually it's the work that I do. And so I have to be really careful to balance that and not become a workaholic. So what I do to look after my own well-being, I live in paradise, so I walk. I've got the sea to walk along. I've got the South Downs to walk along. So lots of walking, lots of fresh air and good social contact, being surrounded by people you love and who love you and laughing. It's got to be the best medicine in the world, isn't it? Just to let it go and just reconnect with the important things in life, which actually are free.
Absolutely. It sounds so simple, though, doesn't it? It's sometimes really hard to tear yourself away from the computer, isn't it?
It is. We were chatting before. We spent the last 2 days working in Brighton. We were running a session in the morning. We finished at 12:30 and the next thing wasn't until 3:30, which was an online. So we could have gone back to the hotel. We chose to stay down there to look after our own well-being rather than getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get the train from St Leonard's. So we could have gone back to the hotel and worked and done emails, and we said, no, we're going to deal with the essential. Then we are going to go for a walk. So we walked for an hour because actually building in that time means when you come back, you're even more effective because you've given yourself a break. And walking, of course, it clears the mind. You come up with the solutions to issues that if you're stuck in a hotel room, you're never going to find. But just stopping allows you to reconnect and you get all the answers and reinvigorated. So finding the time is challenging. And if you think it's challenging, that's your body telling you really need to do it.
Mm. I think there's 2 things that may be hidden in there as well, that if there was somebody else who was encouraging that, isn't it? I think that's really helpful,
Yes.
isn't it? And I think because you spread the message, there's a commitment created there, isn't there? So I often find that the more I tell people, even if I'm worried I'm not going to do it, the more I tell people, the more commitment you've kind of created that you've got to, hasn't, and it actually helps you, doesn't it?
You've got to walk the talk, haven't you?
Yeah. So tricky. So before we discuss the topic in depth of the menopause itself, I'm interested to understand what kind of challenges you about your job and what you love about it.
What I love is the variety. So even though I may be presenting the same information, I'm following the same structure, I'm meeting different people every time I do it. So I roughly work with, up to about 20, 25 people at each training session. And of course, they're never the same person. So it's constantly new. So it's the first time they've heard what I'm saying. So it's all in my mind. It's always fresh. So what I love about is the thousands of women that I've met we've been in menopause delivering this work for over a decade now, and the whole variety of people. And I'm always learning. It is very rarely a time where I don't hear something that I haven't heard before, which is fantastic because then that's more information I can pass on to the next group. So I love the variety of the people that I meet and the fact that I'm always learning. Every day's a school day, if you want it to be. What's challenging is what we've talked about already, is there not enough hours in the day? And also there are some communities that it's really hard to get in front of, which can be frustrating. So I'm relying on organizations of a certain size with a certain budget to hire me to go in and work with their staff. But there's loads of people who don't work for those organizations that I want to get to. So people who work for small and medium sized organizations or run their own business or don't work, or particular cultures, cultural backgrounds, particular ethnicities where there are challenges, where it might be taboo to talk about this at home. So that's what I find challenging, is wanting to get out to the communities that I know are there, but I can't quite reach. So that can be a bit frustrating.
Yeah, I bet it's a genuine challenge, but one I think our society accepts now, doesn't it? And I think there are more levers to pull to try and get in front of that need. Yeah. And maybe something we can look at together as well.
Yeah.
Exciting. So why this particular topic? I'm intrigued. Out of every topic you could have chosen, why have you chosen to become an expert in the menopause?
Because I went through it. So it's always good to talk about something you've experienced. And also, from puberty to postmenopause, as females, we have the same hormones, but the impact those hormones have on us is unique to each and every person. I was unlucky. 1 in 4 women sail through the menopause. I wasn't one of those 1 in 4. I was at the other end. So not every woman will experience pregnancy and childbirth, but every woman, if she lives old enough, will go through the menopausal transition. So it's a globally shared female experience, as is puberty and periods, with pregnancy and childbirth isn't a globally shared female experience. And even though I really, really struggled and had a horrendous time, in retrospect, I'm really glad I didn't sail through the menopause, because if I'd sailed through it, it wouldn't have occurred to me that the need to work in this arena was important. So the fact that I struggled, and I was already in the training arena and recognized it wasn't being talked about, I thought, my goodness, how many women feel isolated as I felt isolated? And there's no point, once I'd learned how to navigate it for myself, there's no point having information if you don't share it with others. So that was the push for me. To get through it.
Fascinating. So what were you doing work-wise at the time?
I've always been in the training arena since my 20s, always in the area of ED&I, so equality, diversity and inclusion, with a particular focus on women in leadership, women in business, but all other areas of diversity as well. So that was my background. So I already had an established base of clients, both public sector and private sector, that I was working with. So it was kind of easy for me to go back to existing clients and saying, I've developed a session around the menopause. Are you interested? And bearing in mind, this was about 12 years ago. And they said, yes, please, because they'd had staff asking, and they were going into a meltdown of panic because I didn't know where to go. And within 6 months, it was 80% of what I was delivering. And that was before it became a popular topic to talk about. So clearly the need was there, which was great.
Yeah. Fantastic. And what's really interesting is that it's coming purely from a non-medical perspective, isn't it? You got any reflections on that? That's
really important. And it's absolutely fantastic that it's being talked about a lot more. I mean, Davina McCall is interesting. The British Menopause Society, and I'm going to their conference in a couple of weeks' time, talk about the Davina effect. And it's fantastic because she made it much easier to have those conversations and to start to break down some of those taboos and barriers. As a result of that, there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon. So there's an awful lot of misinformation out there, which is dangerous for women who are feeling really, really vulnerable. And my stance right from the very beginning, and I say that up front when I run Menopause Demystified, one of the first things I say is I'm not here to tell you to do anything. I'm also not here to tell you not to do anything. I'm here to share well-researched, evidence-based information from a neutral standpoint so that hopefully by the end of the session, you feel better informed and more confident to make the choices that are right for you. And bearing in mind, the choice that is right for you could look completely different to the woman sitting next to you. So that's really, really important that it's neutral information, but it's really well-researched information. So I haven't gone into Dr. Google and made it up. I've got the information, whether it's medical or non-medical, from respected people in their fields.
Fantastic. There's a really big gap there, isn't there? And actually, I think people who come straight to their GPs in that kind of situation are also missing out often, because it's not as simple as just replacing that hormone, which isn't even replacing like for like anyway.
No, almost, but no. And, HRT is fantastic, hormone replacement therapy. And we're still trying to break down the taboos of those global ban headlines in 2002 from the Women's Health Initiative that said HRT causes breast cancer. And as I point out, the HRT that women were put on in 1995 when that trial started is completely different to what's available to women now. It's a completely different product. And they were the wrong headlines anyway. They've been discredited but people are still stuck in that mindset. And so getting them away from that is really, really hard. And so HRT is a lot safer than the press would tell you. And it is not the appropriate route for every person. Some women are medically unable to go on HRT. Some choose not to for whatever reason, and some want to, but they just don't get on with it. There isn't one size fits all. So it's really important that we do know what else is available, and it's not one or the other. I am on HRT and it works for me, but that doesn't mean to say I can do no exercise, eat ultra processed foods, drink and smoke. No, I don't drink. I don't smoke. I walk every day and I have a healthy diet. So it's running along. It's not either or. It's ideally both. But if you can't do the medical, then really, really focus on the lifestyle changes that you can control.
Yeah. Sure. And with the HRT, like you said, there's loads of options, isn't there? And I think as professionals, maybe we don't always even understand all the options. They're so vast, so changing. So empowering somebody to have a think about what they want before they see us.
Absolutely. And I was working with a group yesterday, and I talk about how to prepare for your appointment. So the key is to help your GP to help you. So don't go in being vague. Keep a diary of your symptoms. So prepare for that appointment. And it could be over a couple of weeks, over a couple of months, however frequent your symptoms are and severe. Have a period of time that you think is appropriate. There are symptom checkers for free that you can download. You can print off the symptom questionnaire, which was put together by the British Medical Association and the British Menopause Society. So your doctor will recognize that. Keep a track of it. Think of the questions you want to ask. Type them out. Print it off in duplicate. So you've got a copy, your GP's got a copy. Ask for a double appointment if you think you need it. Take somebody with you if you think you might forget to ask a question, and they will also hear the answer that you might miss if you're feeling a bit anxious. Do what you can to help your GP to help you. That's really, really key. And do some research on the potential treatments. And so you can have that discussion rather than assuming your GP is going to know everything. They're general practitioners. They know an awful lot about an awful lot. So don't expect them to know absolutely everything about HRT.
I think that message of help your doctor to help you is quite a good one for anybody, right?
For anybody, yeah. About anything, not just about menopause.
Yeah. So you've touched on the symptoms. So what are the most common symptoms of the menopause?
The most commonly attributed is hot flashes and night sweats. Whenever I see an article in the press or anything about the menopause, I can almost guarantee 99.9% it will be a woman looking hot with a fan. So it's the most commonly attributed. And it's probably the most common. About 80% of people will experience hot flushes and night sweats, but not everybody. I've met women who don't have any, but it is probably the most common. Also the brain fog, the memory. I have women who say, I was absolutely convinced I was getting dementia. because it's not just walking into a room thinking, what have I come in here for? It's because that's a natural part of aging as well. But it's that complete eradication of everything you thought you knew. And it's terrifying. I was convinced I was getting dementia before I knew it was a perimenopause. And I don't have it in my family history. But for women who do, and of course that fear then exacerbates the problem. So that's really, really common. What can take women by surprise, and it's really common, is the impact on our emotional well-being. Women are expecting physical changes. So they're expecting hot flushes. They're expecting to feel, a bit creaky and a bit achy maybe, but they're not expecting the fact that literally overnight their self-confidence has gone. Their self-esteem has disappeared. They're feeling anxious where they never felt anxious before. I had my one only ever panic attack in the height of my perimenopause, and it's completely irrational. So it's that bit where they feel that they have transformed into somebody they no longer recognize. Is horrible. And that's what I went through. I felt as though I'd walked through an invisible veil and I'd ended up in a parallel universe. And I could see the real world where all the normal people lived. And I thought, I used to live there. I used to be one of them, but I'm not anymore. And I don't know how I ended up here. And I don't think I'm ever going to get back there. And that's really, really frightening. And because people aren't expecting it, that's the bit that can derail them. It's horrible, really horrible. And it's very common. Yeah.
I can see, like, looking at you, like it's a physically painful thing to almost think about and take yourself back there.
Well, I live in St Leonard's, as you know, a top floor flat at the top of a hill. So from my kitchen, I can see the English Channel and the South Downs and Beachy Head. And one day I could remember I was waiting for the kettle to boil and I almost had a feeling of coming out of my body. And I watched myself float out of the kitchen window over the South Downs. I thought, okay, that's it then. Bearing in mind at that point, I didn't know it was a perimenopause. I just thought I'd transformed into somebody I no longer recognized. I thought, well, it's not going to get any better, is it? And I found myself walking into my sitting room and I just watched my fingers on my laptop type out the word suicide. And I had no idea it was a perimenopause. And it's that feeling of isolation and fear was really, really disturbing. And it was only a chance conversation a couple of weeks later with a girlfriend who said she'd just been to see a gynecologist. So I started asking her the penny drop. So that's what it is. And actually the moment I could put a name to it, a lot of the anxiety left me because I thought, now I know what I'm dealing with. Now I can research my options. It was the not knowing what was happening to me was the scariest bit because then I didn't know what to do about it. So, and I was lucky. I was medically able to go on HRT and it worked for me. So that was my route through. Yeah.
But I guess it also gave you a light at the end of the tunnel, not getting you out of the tunnel, but just knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's huge, isn't it?
I had to wait 3 months for the appointment to see the gynecologist, but every morning I woke up, I thought, I'm 24 hours closer to salvation. You've got this far. And every morning that pinprick of light was getting just a little bit bigger until I could walk through it. I thought, and it didn't, HRT didn't happen overnight. The hot flushes did. They stopped. That was it, which was amazing. Everything else, and I say this to women, don't expect it to be the miracle cure that you start taking it and 24 hours later, it'll all be over. Your body needs time to adjust to receiving the hormones that it's got used to not having. So you've got to be patient. So 2 to 3 months, just be patient and track what's happening. And it may be negative initially. I got really bad headaches for a couple of weeks, but my gynecologist warned me I might. I was also warned I might get breast tenderness. So I was expecting these things. So when they came, I thought, okay, I was warned about that. And after a couple of weeks, they went. So probably after about 3 months, when I went for that 3-monthly checkup, I could report the positive changes. But it was probably 6 to 9 months before I thought, wow, I now feel better than I did before the perimenopause started. So nothing is going to work overnight. So it's about consistency and patience and just keeping a track of how you're feeling.
And just touching on, these concerns, could it be dementia? Am I depressed? Could it be something else? Do you have any reflections on blood tests, go to your doctor, those kind of things? Because this is a real question at that point, isn't there? Is there something else significant going on?
I always say to everybody, actually, regardless of age or gender, listen to your body when it's whispering. Don't wait until it starts shouting. The shouts can be dealt with, probably, but it's likely to be more invasive and will take longer. So know what is your normal. So don't compare yourself to somebody else. What is your normal? In other words, how is your body functioning, feeling and behaving when everything is good. Then when you notice something that falls outside of your normal, deal with it when it's tiny. And just because it might not be the norm for people of your age, that's irrelevant. It's not your normal. And that's really, really important. So deal with it. Make sure that you get it investigated, because some of the less well-known symptoms that women don't know about, one of them is heart palpitations. And that's really, really common in menopause. And if you have them, don't think, oh, it's all right, it's perimenopause. No, go and get your heart checked out, which I spent a day at the Conquest, A&E at Conquest, because I was convinced I was having a heart attack. And everything was checked out, absolutely fine, nothing wrong with me. And it was only once it had been investigated and everything eliminated and I started researching it. All right, so that's a possibility of, oh, okay. But I didn't make that assumption. So it's really important that if anything isn't your normal, get any other reason, potential reason investigated and eliminated. And then if no other reason can be found, it may be due to the perimenopause. But don't ignore symptoms.
Yeah, it's really tricky. And it's one we battle with as well. So because the guidelines are around blood test, for example, for hot sweats, it is very simple. Actually, if it's everything else is consistent with the menopause, that's to be expected. So there's a whole range even for us, isn't there, of let's not over medicalize.
Yep.
But equally, there's some really important symptoms that we mustn't ignore. So it's a tricky one to navigate.
It is tricky. The nice guidelines for GPs are that if your patient is perimenopausal and over the age of 45, don't do a blood test, because the fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone is so bizarre that actually a woman could have 2 blood tests on the same day and get 2 completely different blood results if that's what's being checked. So the nice guidelines are just to look at hormones. One blood test is probably not going to be very conclusive, but it's probably better to listen to what your patient is telling you and how they're presenting. So the frequency, the impact and the severity of the symptoms is likely to be a clearer indicator than looking at levels of estrogen and progesterone.
Thanks for clarifying that. And I'm just interested in how we define the menopause. And you just mentioned perimenopause, so I've got something clear in my head, but you're the expert. I often find patients don't quite realize what we mean medically when we say menopause, perimenopause.
Yeah. And it is confusing that there are 2 stages, peri and post. And from a medical point of view, the menopause is 1 day. And when women look at me, I go, what are you talking about? It goes on for years. So yeah, the transition does. But from a medical point of view, the menopause day is what defines when you've gone from being perimenopausal to postmenopausal. And that is indicated if you have natural monthly bleeds. So you menstruate naturally and you haven't had a period for 12 months. That's when you go from being perimenopausal to postmenopausal. And the perimenopause can start up to 10 years before that day. And not every woman experience an irregularity in periods, but an irregularity in periods is one of the key indicators that you're getting to the tail end of that 10 years. But I didn't. I was as regular as clockwork and then bang, they suddenly stopped. But a lot of women will go 6 months without a period, then they get a slight bleed, then a couple of weeks later they get a flood, then nothing for 3 months, then a normal period. So that's the body saying, okay, we're getting really, really close now. Start to keep a watch, because if I haven't come back for the next 12 months, you've then switched into postmenopause. And then of course we remain postmenopause until we die, which could be half of our life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If we live to 100 and we're postmenopause at 50.
Yeah. Fascinating. So we touched on some of the common causes. Any lesser known symptoms, not causes, symptoms, any lesser known symptoms of menopause that you'd want to highlight?
Itchy skin. And that really takes women by, it's not the odd, we all get the odd itch. It's something called formication. And I always have to say to people, pronounce that very carefully. And it's the feeling of tiny little creatures under your skin. Usually mostly affects the back and the legs, and it can drive women completely crazy. And it's really, really common. And the amount of women go, oh, okay. That keeps me awake at night. It drives me mad. Really, really common. Dry eyes. Is another common one that can have an impact on our hearing. Also is a return or the start of allergies, hay fever, asthma, because as we start to lose estrogen, it disrupts our histamine. It sends it completely haywire. So it isn't functioning the way it used to function. So some women can become allergic to things that they're never allergic to before. It also has an impact on our mucous membrane, so that gets compromised. And the inside lining of the nose is a mucous membrane, so it's not rejecting external allergies as efficiently as it used to. So we can become more susceptible to pollen and to hay fever, to colds and flu viruses, because they get through more easily because the nose isn't rejecting them and it's not creating such a strong barrier. So that's quite common. And we say, oh, that's why I never had hay fever, or I'm suddenly allergic to a bee sting. Never used to be. And it can work in reverse. People can stop being allergic to things that they used to be allergic to. So it can go the other way as well. But actually that's quite common. But not many women recognise that.
Interesting. What about urine infections?
Yes. So as we start to lose estrogen, another very common thing, which is something I experienced but didn't realise what it was at the time, is vaginal atrophy. So as we start to lose our estrogen, it can have an impact on the lining, the vaginal walls. So they go from thick and ridged with the ability to stretch to thin and flat with the inability to stretch. And for some women, even the insertion of a tampon can be too much. And the thought of a cervical smear test, it makes them go weak, just the thought of it. And it's really, really common. And also the loss of estrogen means we lose our natural vaginal lubrication. Also keeping up our pelvic floor muscle exercises, because that hammock of muscle, the pelvic floor muscle, supports all of our internal organs, including our bladder. So if we have strong pelvic floor muscles, and we can do something about vaginal atrophy, we are minimizing the potential for UTIs. And leakage.
Yeah, even just getting urgency and things, isn't it? Yeah. So why the hell do all of these symptoms come? So you're losing a couple of hormones.
Yeah.
Why? Well, first of all, 80% of people flushing. So why the hell does that happen? And the rest, we've talked about. Then you've mentioned why maybe the allergies thing. That's really interesting to me. We've talked about why urine infections and bladder instability and things. But there are some other things, aren't there, that we haven't touched on? Bone thinning, for example, isn't it? So why the hell did these things happen?
That's a very good question. If only I had the answer. Estrogen is the female dominant hormone. Men have it as well. So boys will get estrogen at puberty and girls will get testosterone at puberty. So we both have both hormones, just in different proportions. I don't know why estrogen creates so much havoc. But it does, and it is everybody is a potential risk of osteoporosis, but I think 3 or 4 times as many women will get it because we lose so much estrogen. So it helps to protect our bones in our reproductive lifespan. Our bone density, so the inside of the bones, helps to protect our heart, looks after our brain function. So women, because we lose so much, as we lose estrogen, it speeds up that bone density loss, which is why we're much higher risk of osteoporosis post-menopause. And also post-menopause, why women catch up with men in terms of heart attack and heart disease risk. We don't overtake them, but we catch up with them in terms of risk because we've lost the estrogen. In fact, if you take a 60-year-old man and a 60-year-old woman, and if the woman isn't on HRT, the man will have more estrogen than the woman, which shows how much we lose, virtually all of it. So it is a very, very important hormone for women, and particularly important if women have a full hysterectomy or a partial hysterectomy where the ovaries are removed and they're under 51. The ideal scenario is that their estrogen is replaced with HRT until they reach 51, which is the average age for menopause, because of the potential long-term impact of losing estrogen before the average age. So the impact on their bones, the impact on their heart, is really, really important, because you take away the source, which is the ovaries, they are plunged into an instant medically induced menopause, which is brutal. Yeah.
And I don't think we recognise that enough, really. We prepare people for that enough, do we? So.
No. And there's a cultural difference as well. So the average age is talks about 51. Yeah, that's for women who look like me, i.e. they're white. For women from the subcontinent, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, it's actually 46. So it's 5 years earlier. Where African women, it tends to be anything between 8 to 12 months earlier. Then there are different symptoms, different ability to discuss it in the home environment because of cultural sensitivities around that. So it's really interesting that, we're not, the UK isn't white exclusively. So, different cultures and ethnicities will have different experiences of this transition.
So half an hour in, it's been all doom and gloom,
Is it really?
hasn't it?
Oh, gosh, already.
And I'm thinking, God, we need to talk about how it can help people, don't we? So tell me a bit about, what you're finding really helps people who are struggling with the perimenopause.
Understanding that it is a perimenopause, I think, is, for me, that was the biggest thing, being able to put a name to it. That was the biggest thing, because then I could explore my options. Also, when I'm running the session, I've got a slide that says, what is the menopause? And I say the two most important words on this slide are transition and natural. So the thing is to remember, it's a natural transition that every woman will experience if we're lucky enough to live through it. So it's something that we're all going to go through if we're female. And it's a transition. And while you're in it, the end of that transition may seem that it's never ever going to arrive. And it does. Transitions have an ending. So it's about how we navigate the transition and recognizing that life on the other side is fabulous. And I say to women, if somebody said, I've got a lottery ticket here, you're guaranteed to get £1 million. You don't have to give me money for it, but the price is you go back to having periods. I'd say, yeah, thanks awfully. I'll stay poor and postmenopausal, thanks. So there is not enough money in the world to convince me to go back to having periods, because life on the other side is very bright indeed. And I didn't realize how much energy it took to navigate my hormones until I no longer had to. Because I did it, puberty kicks in. For me, I had something called precocious puberty. So my period started when I was 5 years old. And I was much later in my postmenopause. I was 58 before I was officially postmenopausal. So the average reproductive lifespan is 35 to 40 years, and I had 53. So I was really ready to say goodbye to my periods. Okay. And I didn't realize how instinctively I tried to organize my training diary around my monthly cycle, because I knew the first day of my period, I wouldn't be delivering at my best. And it was so instinctive, I didn't realize I was doing it. Until suddenly I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not having periods anymore. I could do a training course any day I like. Then I realized how much energy it had taken to navigate those hormones, and I'd been set free. Somebody had cut the strings from the puppet master and I was set free. And that surge of energy, I thought, wow, what am I going to do with it? So in Asia, they refer to the menopause as the second spring. So it's seen as the start of the new beginning, not the ending. In Saudi Arabia in 2019, they say rebranded, but the menopause isn't a brand. It was kind of reimagined, if you like, because it used to be called the Age of Despair. And women in Saudi Arabia said, you know what, that's really not working for us. So they came up with the medics and women 6 alternative ways of describing the menopausal transition. And the one that was the most popular was the age of renewal. So that went out in Saudi Arabia in 2019, which very quickly spread through the rest of the Middle East. So there are other parts of the world that view women at midlife differently, where they are respected for their age and their wisdom. They are celebrated for their age and their wisdom. They are seen as valuable members of society. So it's reframing it in our own minds. You're only invisible if you choose to be. I'm more visible at 64 than I was at 44. The older I get, the busier I become. The older I get, the younger I've decided the younger I'm going to become. I've made that very conscious decision. So it's about thinking, now I've been set free from my hormones. I've potentially got half my life waiting in front of me. What am I going to do with it? And how am I going to live it according to my rules rather than other people's? When we're younger, we're quite often concerned with the opinions of others, and we're pleasing. What are people expecting of us, whether it's parents, teachers, university lecturers, employers? It's fulfilling other people's expectations of what they think we should be doing. Suddenly, you're halfway up that mountain of life. You can press the pause button, look round to the bottom, celebrate how far you've already come, then look to the top and think, right, what's the rest of the journey going to look like according to me? Which is why it's one of the most powerful and potent time of a woman's life, because you think, right, what do I want to do? What's my meaning and purpose in life? What are my values? What's the rest of the journey going to look like according to me? So that's why it's so powerful. Killer whales also go through the menopause. And when a female orca is postmenopausal, the big beefy male killer whales promote her instantly to the head of the pod and swim behind her. And follow her wisdom and her experience in life, which I would love to take into the boardroom in UK businesses.
There we go. Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of, we touched on HRT, haven't we? In terms of one thing that will help, and it can be transformational, can't it? Before that step, and I like to think of as a medic, what the interventions we can make first, kind of lifestyle, aren't they? And I guess, and so are there any lifestyle modifications, and maybe I'll bundle that with other complementary therapies that you'd recommend?
I get a lot of women who say to me, Katie, I haven't changed anything. I'm eating the same I used to eat in my 20s and 30s. I'm doing the same level of exercise or none. I haven't changed anything, but I don't feel as good and my body's changing shape. Unfortunately, my answer is that's the problem. You haven't changed anything. We do need to make some changes. Everybody's metabolism starts to slow down in their late 30s. The loss of estrogen means our metabolism as women slows down even further. How we use food for energy gets compromised. So actually we do have to make some changes. And the key thing is about being proactive rather than reactive. So prepare yourself for the menopausal transition rather than try to deal with it once it's arrived, because it's easy to get your body ready. So start to make those changes possibly in your early to mid 40s. So look at your nutrition. And I say nutrition very specifically rather than diet, because diet has different connotations for a lot of people in their mind. Hippocrates, let medicine be thy food and food be thy medicine. So start thinking of nutrition, and when you're eating, what is it doing for you? And is it doing you good? And if it isn't, then try not to eat it. And keep it within 20%, not 80%. Have a look at ultra processed food. Every now and again, a food that just has calories and no nutrition isn't going to kill you. But if it's your daily go-to, it will. And I don't sugarcoat this message for people, because nutrition is so important. And we don't have to do anything. It's a really good idea if we choose to reflect on what we're eating and think of food as a medicine that is feeding our body. Our heart needs good nutrition. Our brain needs good nutrition. Our joints need good nutrition. So just think about what you're eating and think about, what am I doing? What am I feeding myself to do well? Think about exercise. The older we get, the more we need to move. That's really, really important. Use it or lose it. Particularly balance. We keep our muscles strong because that supports our skeleton. One of the biggest fears of people as they get older is falling over and not being able to get up unaided. So if we keep our muscles and our skeleton strong, we're far more likely to be able to recover from falls or not fall in the first place. So think about your social capital. Are you well connected? Do you have a strong sense of community? Are you keeping your brain active? So what can you do? Do you smoke? Ideally stop if you can. And I absolutely appreciate it's really, really hard, but maybe look at that. How we metabolize alcohol. Alcohol can make menopausal symptoms a lot worse. So think about that, because our body will process it differently. So just have a look at in fact, last year with Professor Talalika, we produced a lifestyle factors and the menopause leaflet, which is free. So I can send you the download link if you want to share that with people. So it's really, really important. We do a life check and just press that pause button and think, okay, what can I control? What can I do to help my body be in the best place possible? The British Menopause Society will talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, acupuncture and yoga as being viable alternatives for women who are medically unable to go on HRT or choose not to go down the medical route, particularly for hot flushes and anxiety. CBT is now available from the NHS. So there are the non-medical options that women can explore. The important thing is to find what works for you, because HRT doesn't work for every woman. Acupuncture isn't going to work for every woman. So, it's finding a bit of experimentation and find what you feel comfortable with and what's going to work for you.
Thank you. When I think of complementary therapies, I also think of things like red clover, black cohosh.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about those?
Red clover is a phytoestrogen, a plant estrogen, and it's where some estrogen and HRT comes from, as well as soy plants and yams, as does utrogestan, which is the micronized progesterone, also comes from a yam plant. So yeah, they can be really, really good. And women say, if I start drinking soy milk, will that help me? And I said, well, you'd have to drink an awful lot of it to replace the estrogen you're going to get in HRT. You probably need to have done it from birth. Like, Japanese people have a very phytoestrogen rich diet. And until about 15 years ago, there wasn't a word for hot flush in Japan, because Japanese women didn't have them until they started having more of a Western diet. Then they had to introduce the word for hot flush in Japanese, which shows how much our nutrition impacts our symptoms. So yeah, it's not going to do you any harm. The thing with red clover is because it's a phytoestrogen, a plant estrogen, it may be contraindicated for women who are recovering from or at risk of estrogen receptive breast cancer. So that's something, before automatically thinking it's natural, therefore it's safe. Just because we can buy our supplements at our supermarket as part of our weekly shop doesn't mean to say we should, because generally speaking, the supplement market is unregulated, whereas HRT is regulated. So just work with somebody who's very well qualified in that field, because some of them may be contraindicated if you're taking any pharmaceutical drugs, and they may have long-term health benefits. You know, I had somebody yesterday say, evening primrose oil I've been on for years. Evening primrose oil is very high in omega-6, and long-term use of omega-6 is not a good idea because it may cause internal inflammation, which will cause aches and pains. You said, oh my goodness, I've been having aches and pains for months and I didn't realize what it was. So try not to self-prescribe, but talk it through with somebody who is aware of potential interactions and contraindication.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. So from our perspective as GPs as well, this is a tricky subject because we can't recommend anything like that, as you say, because it's totally unregulated.
Yeah.
We don't have any idea of the products that we'll be getting and whether there's contaminants in them or anything, isn't it? So like you say, it's a tricky one because I wouldn't even want to say go to GP for that one in particular, is it?
It's tricky.
The whole area is unregulated, but yet some people get a real benefit too.
Yeah. I had a woman yesterday who has oily fish virtually every day and takes cod liver oil supplements. I say, please save your money. 2 or 3 times a week, oily fish, you're getting all the omega-3 that the body needs. Don't waste your money on cod liver oil supplements. And actually the nutritional route of all of these goodies is much better to get it through the food than it is through a supplement, because the body will recognize the food and it will know what to do with it. If you take a supplement, you're getting a concentrated aspect of one part of that food source, which is an alien thing that the body thinks, quite sure what I'm meant to do with this. And you may be having too much of it. You know, more is not better when it comes to supplements. So ideally, get everything that you need from your nutrition. And there are some things like maca root, which is a Peruvian plant, and it's the dried leaves of the plant that are turned into a powder. Now, we can't get that nutritionally. And that's been shown under randomized clinical trial to be really, really good for many menopausal symptoms. So that might be something worth exploring, and it's potentially contraindicated with breast cancer. So again, always do your own due diligence, do your own research. A very, very well qualified, scientifically trained nutritionist will be able to advise you appropriately, but try not to pop into your local healthcare store and self-prescribe, because it might be fine, but it might not be. And it's the unknown that is tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the bit I'm hearing from you there that I'm keen to highlight as well is that by and large, the rule of thumb, most things will be better if your diet is good, varied in terms of plant matter. I think, and that's not just the menopause. We're talking about
everybody.
A hell of, nearly all of the problems I see would probably be better if we ate more plant matter and less processed food.
Yeah. We talk about what we should eat, and we say that about 78% of our nutrition, about 42 of that should come from as many different coloured vegetables and fruit. And I very specifically say vegetables and fruit, not fruit and vegetables. So the emphasis is on the vegetables, not on the fruit, because some fruit's very, very high in sugar. And as many different colours, because every colour will have a different set of goodies that the body is desperate to receive and screaming out for you to put into it. And then I say the biggest message I can give you is ditch the white stuff and eat the brown stuff. So keep your refined carbohydrates of white bread, white pasta and white rice to around about 10% of your overall carbohydrate intake. Because if you eat the refined, you're spiking your blood sugar levels the moment you eat it. We are at a higher risk of type 2 diabetes post-menopause. So that's adding to the problem. Your poor brain will get a hit of energy. With the hit comes the crash. With the crash comes the desire for the next hit. So your brain is spending so much energy coping with this constant fluctuation that it's not looking after you. Is bad for your gut biome. Your gut and your brain are talking to each other all the time. If you have the whole grain and the whole wheat, the body has to work to break down the fiber, which means the energy is released slowly. So it doesn't spike your blood sugar levels. So try and keep the refined, ditch it if you can, but keep it to about 10%. Fat won't make you fat. It's refined sugar that makes you fat. The body needs the right fat. So the omega-3s, the olive oil, the avocados, the unsalted nuts and seeds. It keeps your arteries clear, keeps your circulation going. It improves your memory, keeps your joints working. Where we get our protein from is the bit that changes depending on the diet that you follow. So, 3 portions of protein a day because your muscles need protein. And remember, your heart is a muscle. So it's got to be fed with good quality protein. So if you're a vegan, you'd get that from chickpeas, lentils, beans, peas, vegetarian, all of that, plus eggs and cheese. And of course, if you eat animal protein, you can get it from any source.
Thank you. Also interested because we touched upon increasing the likelihood of osteoporosis, heart disease. You've touched on breast cancer. Are there any kind of important regular screenings or checkups that you're going to recommend for menopausal women?
I strongly support and encourage every person, when you get invited by the NHS for a check, to always take it. So up to about the age of 60, we will have cervical smear screenings roughly every 5 years, depending on our history. Then between 50 and 70, we'll get mammograms. Then, of course, once you hit 60, you then get the bowel cancer screening. So anything that is offered to you, absolutely turn up. It is so important. Remember, listen to the body when it's whispering. Don't wait until it starts shouting. It's so important. Ideally, if the NHS had the ability to do so, women would also be invited for a regular DEXA scan to look at their bone density. That currently isn't part of regular screening, but I encourage women to notice any changes. So I was diagnosed with osteoporosis in my early 50s, which is quite young. I think it's probably hereditary because my mother had it. And even though it was a shock, it wasn't a whole surprise because the clues had been there and I hadn't listened to my body when it was whispering. I stopped wearing heels because I was convinced I was going to fall over because my ankles felt weak. If I picked up a kettle full of water, I went, ah! And the first ones to go were the bones in the wrist because they're so tiny. I changed the way I cooked. I wasn't picking up saucepans of boiling water because I didn't trust myself. So all the clues were there. So it wasn't a huge surprise. And actually, because my route was HRT in 18 months of estrogen, it reversed and I no longer have osteoporosis. 5 to 6 prunes a day will do the same as estrogen in reversing osteoporosis, which is interesting, which was discovered by NASA because astronauts, zero gravity has a hugely negative impact on bone density. And they did a trial with astronauts and 10 to 12 prunes a day. The average bone density increase after a year was 11%. And 4 years ago, they replicated the trial with peri and postmenopausal women. And 5 to 6 prunes a day had an average of 6% bone density increase. And I had a 6% bone density increase on HRT, which reversed my osteoporosis. So 5 to 6 prunes, no idea why. There are 4 trials around the world currently taking place to understand what happens when a plum turns into a prune that protects bone density, but it does. So 5 to 6 prunes a day is another way to look after your bones. And if you notice anything like I did, that, can't pick up a kettle of water and osteoporosis is in your family history, request a DEXA scan just to be sure.
Sure. Thank you. I suppose just work from the GP's perspective. Yeah, it's tricky because it's not a screening thing. So we can't, it doesn't just happen, but what we can do is kind of almost calculate that fracture risk. Certainly if you had a fracture, you should get a DEXA scan, that a low impact fracture. If your fracture risk is raised, which it probably will be if you're fairly slight in build and postmenopausal, then we can request that DEXA. I think in terms of the pain is an interesting one. So technically, I think the pain you're experiencing is probably more ligamental from it, because osteoporosis per se shouldn't cause pain. So I think there's an alarm bell if you've got pain that there's something else potentially, and because you can fracture and then that causes pain. And so I wouldn't want to reassure people if their pain's gone, their osteoporosis is gone. So there's some slight subtleties that I would want to make sure kind of people are aware of as well.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Thank you for that.
In terms of the menopause in general and healthcare professionals and patients, what's the main kind of takeaway that you're hoping for from today? Because we covered some really gritty pieces, and I think I've got the take-home message, but I'm interested in what you want that take-home message to be.
For people going through the menopausal experience is celebrate your second spring. Life begins post-menopause. As you mentioned at the beginning, I started my master's at 60. I couldn't have considered doing that when I was going through that menopausal transition. So I was in the height of my perimenopause in my 50s. Actually, for me, because I had a late menopause, life began at 60, which was fantastic. So just think you're only invisible if you choose to be. Don't let other people project that onto you. So who are you going to be? You are probably at your most powerful and your most potent. You've got potentially half your life stretching out ahead of you. What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it? Eleanor Roosevelt was a wonderful woman with some fantastic quotes, and there's two of my favorite. One is, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And what I find is that the older I get, the less likely I am to give people that consent. So you start to own who you are as a woman in the world. And another one of my real favorites from Eleanor Roosevelt is, well-behaved women rarely make history. And I love that. So I say to women, go out as a postmenopausal woman and create havoc. Misbehave as much as you possibly can, because if you don't do it now, when are you going to do it? And there's a wonderful article in The Guardian in March this year of Barbara McInnes, who learnt to play the drums at the age of 89. She's now 92. And every Saturday night can be found in her leather jacket, playing the drums in her local pub in the band. And she says, I've unleashed my inner wild woman. So unleash your inner wild woman and make the most of your second spring. So that's for women. For GPs, medical profession, is try and move away from that really deep-rooted belief that many have that if a woman is not in her 50s, she cannot be perimenopausal. Because the span is 45 to 55 for white women, is 41 to 51 for Indian, Pakistan and Bangladesh. And 10% of white women will reach the menopause, have an early menopause between 40 and 45. So you could have a patient in her late 30s, early 40s who's right at the peak of her perimenopause. And so many women are told, you're not in your 50s, your periods are still regular, you're not perimenopausal. And that's not true. So just move away from thinking if a woman's not in her 50s, it can't possibly be the perimenopause, because it might be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a really useful take-home message. But I also don't want to overshadow your message about people unleashing yourself and playing the drums. And I think that's awesome. So, but coming back to healthcare professionals, I've got a question from a previous guest, who is Miriam Malik, our GP and medical director here. And she wondered if you had any reflections on what we should do about HRT in someone who's been really happy on it and thriving since menopause, but they're now 70.
If, without knowing that particular patient's full medical history, it would be impossible to, and I'm not a GP, to give a one answer fits all for that. However, if she is healthy and her blood pressure is checked at least annually and the blood pressure stays normal, there is no need for her to stop taking HRT. It's very much down to personal choice. And I have this discussion with Professor Talalika, Professor Manyonda. Professor Talalika's oldest client is 86 and she's just had her marina coil replaced and is still on HRT. She also goes swimming, cold water swimming every day. So as long as you stay healthy and there are no other medical contraindications, it may be that the dose might be adjusted. So I've had this discussion with my gynecologist. When I reach 70, I'm on 2 pumps of estrogen every day. I may consider going down to 1 just as a maintenance dose to keep my bones healthy and to keep me feeling good. And we'll have that discussion when I get there. But I have no intention of stopping if medically I'm able to continue. So there is no medical reasons this patient should stop. It's down to consultation with her GP and personal choice and making sure her blood pressure stays normal.
Sure. Thank you very much. So in the tradition of asking the question of the next guest, our next podcast, we've got Jason Newbury to talk to us about supporting health and wellbeing through activity. What would you like to ask him?
We all know that moving is really, really important. And there's a lot of information out there about HIIT, high interval training, high intensity interval training. But there's also recently, I've been reading a lot of studies that say women at peri and post-menopause, particularly post-menopause, really vigorous, high intensity physical activity can be detrimental rather than beneficial. So what is your view on what is the right level and right type of exercise that is most appropriate for postmenopausal women?
Thank you. I will certainly take that forward. I think what we haven't touched on now is, and it feels a little bit relevant, not want to leave it behind, is the importance of kind of load-bearing exercise, isn't there, for menopausal women?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to stop our discussions without talking about that, because I think it's highly important.
Really, really important. Yeah. So we ideally, with our exercise, we want a mixture of weight bearing, resistance, and cardiovascular. So walking very quickly up a hill will give you all three of those. See, any walking or jogging, maybe if we're moving away from the vigorous, maybe not running, but anything where you're getting your heart, so that pounding is going to help your bone density. The resistance means your leg muscles are resisting the incline, so you're keeping your muscles strong. And of course, if you're walking uphill, you're giving your heart and lungs a bit of a workout as well. So a very brisk walk up a hill will tick all of those, but try and incorporate weight bearing, really important for our bone density, resistance, important for our muscle strength, and cardiovascular to look after our heart and lungs.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I'll definitely ask that question. High intensity physical activity. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. It was such fun. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Yeah, me too. I've learned a hell of a lot. I need to frantically take notes now, I think, so I can make sure I fix it in my longer term memory. But thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure. You've been listening to the Health and Wellbeing podcast about menopause with Katie Day and me, Dr Nick Harvey. Menopause is clearly a complex area which we've only touched on today. So for more information and resources, check out our website, sdhc.org.uk. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at sdhc.feedback@nhs.net. Tune in to our next episode, where we'll be interviewing Jason Newbury on supporting health and wellbeing through activity. Please take a moment to subscribe to help support us in supporting others with their health and wellbeing.